Excellent. Hello and welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to be able to join you just to offer a bit of commentary. I wanted to provide an update on some of the housing projects that we rolled out over the course of the past week. We're doing what we can to accelerate the delivery of the programs that we have on the books, in addition to what new measures may come in the weeks and months ahead. But last week was a particularly busy week when it comes to getting projects out the door. I want to talk about two programs in particular. First, the Rental Construction Financing Initiative, and second, the Housing Accelerator Fund. The Rental Construction Financing Initiative is a low-cost financing program that the federal government has put in place to create more favorable financing terms to allow buildings to move ahead, projects that are going to provide homes typically for hundreds of people or families at a time, despite the high interest rate environment that we're living through right now. The way that the program works is by allowing the federal government to pass on its very low rate of borrowing in exchange for certain conditions. We want to make sure that when builders have access to this program, a particular portion of the units in any given development are offered at and below market prices, which is going to help bring down the cost of rentals over time. As a result of the projects that we've announced just last week, we expect to see nearly 12,000 additional apartments be constructed just through this single program during last week's announcements. We had broad coverage across the country. 36 different communities are going to be benefiting from these projects. The folks behind me are here not by coincidence, but in fact, we're all making announcements in their own community. I look in Ottawa, Oakville, Abbotsford, Langley, Surrey, Montreal, Quebec City, London, Calgary, Halifax West, Truro. Did I leave anyone out here? It's, but I think you'll get the impression that by delivering the programs that we have in stock, we're going to be able to accelerate the pace of construction. In addition to the Rental Construction Financing Initiative, we continue to roll out the Housing Accelerator Fund. Last year, we were able to successfully announce agreements that are now signed, sealed, and delivered with the City of Calgary and the City of Moncton. In Calgary, a $228 million agreement is expected over the next few years to deliver 7,000 additional homes, and incredibly, the city is projecting over the next 10 that number is going to reach 35,000. Again, the City of Moncton, though it may be of a smaller scale, is extremely important. Of course, me as an Atlantic Canadian, I want to see that we're representing the entirety of the country, but Moncton last year was the fastest growing city in the country. Building at the pace that they need to is new to them, and the Housing Accelerator Fund is going to create unique opportunities. Hundreds of homes over the next few years, but 5,500 over the next 10. The running total, based on the projections that we get from the cities and provinces that we partner with, is that now just amongst the cities we've got signed agreements with, the total exceeds 175,000 homes over the next 10 years. By continuing to make the investments necessary, we can get Canada building more quickly, and I'm very pleased to see the progress that we were able to achieve just in the last week. With that, I'm happy to take whatever questions you may have.
Monsieur Fraser, on comprend que dans la mise à jour économique demain, il sera question de la location à court terme, le Airbnb. Comment ça peut affecter ça, les gens, avoir accès à de meilleurs logements? Comment le gouvernement fédéral pourra s'y prendre pour s'attaquer à ce problème?
Merci pour la question, et c'est très important pour adresser chaque enjeu si nous voulons adresser la crise nationale de logement. Un enjeu qui est important est les problèmes avec des, comment dit-on, short-term rentals?
Location court terme.
La question?
Location.
Oh, l'occasion à court terme. OK, merci. Mais il y a des outils avec la municipalité, avec la province et aussi avec le gouvernement fédéral. Pour le gouvernement fédéral, il y a des possibilités pour utiliser le système d'impôt pour adresser des avantages. Mais ce n'est pas pour moi aujourd'hui pour annoncer les mesures qui sont dans la mise à jour économique. C'est pour le ministre des Finances demain. Mais je pense que nous avons des opportunités pour réduire le nombre du logement qui est utilisé pour cette raison et pour augmenter le nombre de logements en général pour la population.
You try to get that in English as well too. How big an issue is Airbnb to the current housing crunch we're seeing?
So Every measure that we advance helps. To put it into perspective, we believe that there's likely tens of thousands of homes that could be made available to Canadians, certainly by addressing this particular challenge. But we know we need to build and build by the millions. That's why we're not just looking at addressing short-term rentals, but in fact we're looking to increase the pace of construction in Canada. It's why we're looking to change the math to make it work for builders. It's why we continue to invest in affordable housing. It's why we're looking at new ways to grow the productive capacity of the Canadian workforce when it comes to home building. But we do believe by addressing the challenge around short-term rentals, as the recent example from the province of British Columbia demonstrates, has the potential in the short term to bring on new pockets of supply, particularly in environments that have a large number of short-term rentals, whether it's Airbnb or some other particular service that short-term rentals are using. My sense is if there's tens of thousands of units that we can turn into not a competitor for a hotel or for a few nights, but a home for a family and a community, it's incumbent upon us to do everything we can to use the properties that are available for homes.
So would that include getting the CRA to bring in some new tax measures for people who own short-term rentals?
There's things that we are very much looking at along those lines to use the tax system. Of course, the federal government doesn't necessarily have jurisdiction to prescribe exactly what may happen on the ground, which typically would fall to municipalities or potentially to provincial governments. But we do have the authority to make changes through the federal system of taxation. This is one of the areas that we're looking at, but it's not necessarily the only one.
Did you see the latest numbers this morning that kids of homeowners are more than double as likely to become homeowners themselves? How can we help level the playing field for people whose parents don't own homes?
So I did see the top line numbers. I'm interested in digging into the deeper reasoning behind the data that was published. I only saw it this morning for us. One of the things that's essential to me is your ability to succeed in Canada shouldn't depend on how much money is in your parents' bank account. It's not right, it's not fair. But we also shouldn't discriminate against the idea that a person can have a full life with meaningful participation in their community if they choose to rent. For a period of my own life, rental was exactly what made sense for me. I wanted mobility, I wanted the opportunity to pursue opportunities in different parts of the country when I was trying to figure out how I was going to pay down student loans when I finished my education. The reality is some people for their entire lives, some people for a portion of their lives are going to find that renting a place is exactly what they need. We want to make sure that we address the housing supply by including the idea that you can live in a community and participate fully if you choose to rent. That said, there's going to be a lot of people who want to choose home ownership, and it shouldn't be a barrier to them to access the market just because their parents never owned a home. The different kinds of things that we're trying to address would include measures like the first home savings account. We've seen over 250,000 disproportionately young people start one of these new accounts that's designed to help people get into the market by allowing them to put what they're able to afford towards a down payment tax-free, knowing that it's going to help them get over that first hump of a down payment more quickly.
C'est un problème majeur ou un petit problème en matière de logement? À quel point c'est un problème?
Un problème largeur?
Airbnb. Est-ce que c'est un problème majeur en matière de logement ou pas tant que ça?
C'est juste pour l'occasion, pour le court terme ou du logement en général?
Pour le logement en général,
OK, c'est une crise nationale, pas du logement en général. C'est pourquoi nous avançons des mesures qui changent les mathématiques. C'est pourquoi nous avançons des mesures pour continuer des investissements dans du logement abordable. C'est pourquoi nous continuons à avancer des politiques pour augmenter la capacité de l'économie pour construire du logement. Mais OK, spécifiquement dans l'occasion de court terme, c'est important. Ce n'est pas possible pour augmenter le nombre de logements comme des millions avec ces mesures, mais je pense que nous avons l'opportunité pour augmenter le nombre, quelques 10 000, tens of thousands. C'est très important pour utiliser chaque outil dans le système maintenant. S'il y a une politique avec l'habilité pour augmenter 1 million unis de logements, c'est très important. Mais c'est très important aussi pour adresser beaucoup des opportunités avec des nombres de logements sérieux, mais il y a moins de quelques millions. Alors, si nous utilisons chaque outil dans le système, c'est possible pour adresser la crise nationale du logement, incluant par adresser le système de l'occasion court terme.
Housing Accelerator is already working, and the promise to remove GST on housing is already getting builders building. Why promise an additional $15 billion in loans?
So I assume you're referring to reports about what may be in the fall economic statement. I'm not here to share the details of what will or will not be in that program. But we thankfully do have a low-cost financing program right now that I think you can use as a proxy for the analysis. The Rental Construction Financing Initiative, as I've shared during my remarks today, is currently unlocking additional housing supply. It's doing that by providing a lower rate of interest than anyone can get on the market in exchange for a commitment from builders that they're going to make homes available at prices that people can actually afford. One of the reasons we need to continue to scale the financings that are available is we created more appetite for builders to build more quickly as we made changes around the GST, for example. If you have the tax measures in place alone where you incentivize home construction, you need to make sure the economy has the capacity to provide financing if you're going to maximize the output of those other measures you put in place. When you actually marry tax incentives to allow people to build, and then you enable that building by providing low-cost financing, the combined effect is going to see a multiplier in the sense that you will get more homes built than you would with either one policy or the other alone. But the short answer is by providing low-cost financing, you can incentivize more building, and you can incentivize more building with a commitment that the prices will be at a lower price than what the market would bear.
So against that, then, how do you make that argument when there's calls for fiscal prudence here?
Oh, the good news is the low-cost financing programs, they are not a big cost to government. We put money up front, but it gets paid back. And we tend to deal with institutional builders disproportionately under this program who have a long history of building, borrowing, paying back their loans that they owe, and on the heels of that arrangement, seeking additional financing for the next project. The loans are offered through CMHC, who is expert in assessing risk of projects and makes financing available where the project makes sense. So from a fiscal point of view, this is not the kind of thing where we issue, last week, $4 billion of loans. That's not a $4 billion expenditure on behalf of the federal government. That's low-cost financing that will be paid back in full.
Minister, we learned over the weekend some new reports regarding the two Michaels. Just wondering if your government feels deceived or blindsided by these reports in any way.
Well, look, I'll leave it to my colleagues who are closer to the file to offer commentary. Obviously, it's a tragedy to see what Canadian citizens were put through being detained for years. But with regard to the specifics, given the sensitivity of the file and on the global stage, I'll leave it to my colleagues in Global Affairs to address your question specifically. Okay, merci tout le monde. Thank you, everyone.
Hi, good afternoon. After question period today, we are scheduled to continue debate on Bill C-57, the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement. I have to say I'm very concerned about the actions of the Conservative Party with regards to this. We have attempted to call this to debate 4 times. On the last 2 occasions, they have brought forward motions of concurrence to obstruct the debate on the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement. I would have thought that this is something that we would have been able to support unanimously through the House of Commons in solidarity with the struggle that Ukrainians are facing right now with the illegal war waged by Russia, with the fact that this is an important piece of legislation that demonstrates Canadian solidarity with Ukraine. I think we need to ask ourselves why the Conservative Party of Canada is obstructing debate, why they don't want to move forward on this. I would hope that they allow debate to happen finally today so that we can move this expeditiously through the House. But I think Canadians need to ask themselves some real questions as to whether the Conservative Party of Canada are truly committed to the Ukrainian people and their fight for sovereignty and their fight for freedom from Russia's illegal war of aggression. We've heard Conservative MPs call this legislation woke. We know that a Conservative MP traveled to a Conservative conference in the UK where there was a paper that used similar kinds of language when it comes to the Ukraine-Russia war that's going on right now. And I think we need to understand if this is the reason why Mr. Poilievre has not commented very publicly about his support for Ukraine. I think it's incumbent upon the Conservatives to work with all the other parties in the House who are supportive of this legislation, allow debate to happen, and to demonstrate our solidarity with Ukraine.
Pourquoi sentez-vous le besoin d'imposer un bâillon sur C-56, votre projet de loi sur l'abordabilité?
C'est une pièce, un projet de loi qui est vraiment important. On veut que ça passe parce qu'on sait qu'il y a des difficultés avec le logement. Maintenant, au Canada, on a besoin de plus de logements qui sont les rentals. De les construire, ça fait 50 ans qu'on n'a pas le fait ici. Et aussi, on a déjà débattu cette législation pour 5 journées et c'est important. Encore une fois, c'est le Parti conservateur qui veut bloquer toute la législation, tous les projets de loi qui vont bénéficier les Canadiens et c'est important d'aller en avance, même si les conservateurs sont en compte d'aider les Canadiens.
Selon votre calcul, quand est-ce que ça va sortir de la Chambre, là, je veux dire, fin de la 3e lecture?
Prochainement. Oui, prochainement. Oui, mais
2 semaines?
je crois moins que ça.
Avez-vous négocié l'appui du NPD pour en arriver avec ce baillon-là? Et qu'est-ce qui a pu être donné en échange pour arriver avec
Bon, comme gouvernement minoritaire, on doit négocier chaque projet de loi parce qu'on n'a pas une majorité, mais c'est quelque chose que je suis disponible pour travailler avec n'importe quel parti qui veut travailler avec nous. On va travailler avec eux. Merci.
Parallel between the Conservatives here and what we're seeing in the United States with the Republicans in regard to funding Ukraine?
I think that's an excellent question to ask the Conservative Party of Canada because I would have assumed that they would be in support of a Canada-Ukraine free trade agreement that would enable Canadian companies to help in the rebuilding of Ukraine. And the fact they're obstructing debate, I think, is a perfect question to be asking the Conservatives. It's a perfect question to ask Mr. Poilievre as to why he has not unequivocally stated his support for Ukraine and their fight for freedom and independence.
The Liberals that they are taking a similar approach to the Republicans?
Well, they're obstructing what I thought would have been a piece of legislation that would have had a really easy ride through Parliament because it's something we've done in partnership with Ukraine. And I know Canadians support Ukraine in their fight for freedom and sovereignty. I don't know what is holding the Conservatives back. So I think those are exactly the kinds of questions we need to be asking. Thank you.
Qu'est-ce que vous avez à faire au NPD?
Je vous demandais parce qu'il y a d'autres mobilisations un peu partout au Québec là, pour sauver les stations régionales, les gens qui s'inquiètent de l'information. Est-ce que vous êtes rendu plus avancé maintenant dans la réflexion concernant d'autres mesures d'aide pour les médias, entre autres le fonds de 50 millions qu'a proposé le Bloc dernièrement?
Bien, premièrement, c'est une bonne chose que les gens se mobilisent pour l'information. C'est vraiment l'information locale, c'est super important. Puis quand on voit des journalistes, comme on l'a vu au cours de la dernière décennie, qui perdent leur emploi, que la population se mobilise, c'est un excellent signal. Ça veut dire que les gens tiennent à l'information. Maintenant, j'ai toujours dit qu'on était ouvert à regarder toutes les solutions qui pouvaient être apportées. Évidemment, il n'y a pas de solution miracle, parce que s'il y en avait une, on l'aurait déjà appliquée. On a mis des programmes sur pied pour mieux soutenir les médias d'information. On va continuer de voir c'est quoi la meilleure façon d'aider tout en protégeant l'indépendance des médias. C'est ça, avec la modernisation de la loi de la radiodiffusion, les audiences qui ont commencé au CRTC, ça aussi, on va voir quel impact ça peut avoir, là, plus de flexibilité, entre autres pour les exigences aux radiodiffuseurs.
Donc, il n'y aura pas de nouvelle aide demain dans la mise à jour économique?
Ça, vous savez aussi bien que moi que les réponses vont venir demain.
Avez-vous plaidé auprès de la ministre Freeland pour qu'il y ait quand même de l'aide pour les médias dans cette mise à jour?
Notre gouvernement a démontré depuis le début qu'on est préoccupé par l'avenir de l'information. C'est pour ça qu'on a mis des programmes qui n'existaient pas auparavant, comme par exemple le programme de crédit d'impôt sur la masse salariale, parce qu'on cherche des moyens de soutenir les médias pour que les journalistes puissent continuer de faire leur travail, puis en même temps de le faire d'une façon à ne pas s'ingérer dans l'administration quotidienne des médias, dans une apparence d'indépendance et d'impartialité. Fait que je sais que c'est ça qu'on a à l'esprit.
Ce programme de crédit d'impôt, est-ce qu'il devrait être prolongé, selon vous, incessamment?
Bien, je pense qu'on voit que la question n'est pas réglée là, sur l'avenir de l'information. Il y a des changements législatifs, des modernisations à certaines lois qu'on a faites. Là.
Mais le temps serait-il opportun, par exemple, demain?
Ça, je vais laisser ça à demain. Merci.
Moi, ce que je comprends, c'est que la réflexion se poursuit. C'est pas terminé. Ce serait trop tôt pour annoncer quelque chose dès cette semaine. Je pense que les problèmes que connaissent les médias d'information, puis aujourd'hui la radiodiffusion avec les gens qui se désabonnent du câble, on n'a pas fini d'en parler, on n'a pas fini de chercher des solutions. Et on n'a pas fini non plus d'essayer de voir c'est quoi le futur pour les modèles d'affaires, pour le journalisme, pour annoncer quelque chose, là, rapidement, là, dès cette semaine.
Merci. Ça, encore une fois, je vais laisser ça à ma collègue des finances. Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Brian Masse, Member of Parliament for Windsor West, NDP critic for industry, science, technology, the Great Lakes, and of course the auto industry is why I'm here. After 21 years of watching the auto industry go through transitions as a Member of Parliament, it's been one of the key elements that we've seen to struggle to rebuild. If you remember, in the old days, we used to have the Auto Pact, and Canada was actually number 2 and 3 in automotive assembly. That disappeared over successive Liberal and Conservative governments where we didn't have a national auto strategy. And with the transition most recently to electric vehicles, we've actually fought to get our corner of the world protected to some degree with regards to some of the innovation. So when we had the recent announcements that have taken place with Stellantis and Nexstar, and of course there's Volkswagen coming up as well too, and others, there was some encouraging news for Canadians. And of course, because of the United States and their policy they set in Washington, we had to respond with some type of supports and measures. At no point in time did I ever expect, though, being an automotive assembler myself, working in the Windsor plant, that we wouldn't have Windsorites or people from Essex County or people from all over Ontario and other parts of Canada building the facilities and the cars and the parts and all the different things that go together, and of course the batteries that are taking place, especially given the high degree of subsidies that are taking place. So it's been rather shocking to learn some of this because it's been a year and a half where I've witnessed so many times successive Liberals and Conservatives taking victory laps and claiming that this is going to be so good for everything, and then to learn most recently that there seems to be an exposure for the public to actually not have the jobs that were promised. And that's why we're fighting for in our community. I've been in touch with Labour, in touch with a number of organizations to make sure that Canadians build these facilities, not only from the ground up, but also supply and work with them afterwards. So there'll be a series of things we're doing. I signed a code letter with the Conservatives federally with regards to looking at this at industry committee. I've already raised it in the House of Commons to a Liberal during questions and comments during another bill, and we'll be looking at for all the tools that I need to use to bring more highlights to this, because I'll conclude with this. I honestly believe that Canadians understand the importance of transitioning into a green economy and want to be part of it, and they actually expect us to be leaders. But when we don't have policy and we don't have transparency, they do get concerned, and justifiably so, upset when we look at public subsidization to corporations that seems to only favor the CEOs and the shareholders and not the workers. And there's no question in my mind that we have the skill set in Windsor, Essex County, and Ontario for these jobs. That has been our history. That has been our legacy of over 100 years of auto manufacturing. We can do this, and we should be doing this, and that's what I'm going to fight for as a New Democrat.
Mr. Masse, one of the things we've heard with this, apparent bringing in of temporary foreign workers is talk around it. Oh, there's like proprietary technology involved in this. How often would you say people in the auto sector are be them contractors or full-time employees are dealing with proprietary technology or information from the various contractors companies are going to hire contractors?
Yeah, I find that hard to believe because some of the companies use actually transient labor as well. And I also had a hard time believing that argument because they actually do co-partnerships in many different ways. So some of the companies actually share information technology and also products. So there are certain ways to protect that. We have been doing that for either the automotive industry and others, but it also goes down the complete supply chain. So the exposure would be extreme that you would have for those types of issues. So you have Tier 1 suppliers, Tier 2 suppliers, and Tier 3 suppliers. So you have a whole series of workers and potential elements that are mixed in there, and so proprietary information can be protected, is protected in the industry, and I have no hesitation whatsoever. The unions that are working on these projects would have the workers are already doing that for some of these auto companies. Most recently there was a union in to do the work for Stellantis, and they protect that technology, and it's actually safer from protecting it because of actually organized labor that's actually doing the work, because they actually have those terms, conditions, and built in there, and they're not fly-by-night operations.
A rep from Minister Boissonneau's office says that only one temporary foreign worker permit has been issued to this point. Do you buy that, or just given what we've seen from the Windsor police so far? Or
yeah, there's enough smoke here that something's happening, and I've seen this before. So I mean, I looked at that permit. I was listed, I think iPolitics listed or whatever at one point in time. I don't even know why they allowed that, but I'm not convinced that there won't be other applications put forth. We know that when the Windsor Police actually did their posting, they also included the picture of the Korean ambassador who was in Windsor, and they wouldn't be there for not a reason. So there's enough reasons here to believe that this needs to be taken seriously. And we have been given notice by unions in the past that there has been this issue brewing for a little bit of a time and concern. And I'm not sure whether it's actually in the contracts because we don't have transparency. That's the difference between New Democrats and the Liberals with regards to an auto policy is we want transparency that also has measurables in there, including the amount of hours and the involvement of the unions into the actual auto policy itself, whereas we still don't have the full disclosure of this contract, and so we don't even know if they even open themselves up to it right at the moment.
Have you had any direct correspondence with any of the unions involved in that plant so far?
Yeah, I have actually been in touch with some of the building trades unions as well. The Unifor, I've been in touch with different local members as well too, talking about the issue, and I got briefed as well too with regards to the skilled trades that they have the capability, not only just in Windsor, they have actually wanting for work, but also they also can pull in people as far away from British Columbia if they wanted to. So this is about Canadian jobs that we can get to build a Canadian facility with Canadian taxpayers' money. That all seems to add up quite well, but adding in foreign temporary workers into an area that already has a housing shortage is a real concern in many different ways. And ironically, so that you got the federal subsidy going on, you got the provincial subsidy going on, and now you have municipal services being soaked into the equation of having to deal with this, as opposed to the money should be going to actually workers from our country, from our community, and also learning the skill set that's necessary to compete for our future.
Conservative leader said this morning that he wants to see an inquiry into this. Is that something you'd back as well?
Yeah, we can have an inquiry, but as long as there's going to be some transparency with regards to how the actual deal was taken shape, and also too is a possible, work towards a national auto policy that hopefully we can all agree on. I think that having an inquiry is one thing, but I also want expectations on the inquiry to actually get deliverables for Canadians. I just don't want another three-ring circus here about an issue that's a hit and run, so to speak, for a political objective. What I actually want is get out of that inquiry proper public policy that leads to good paying jobs for people.
A little bit. Have you spoken to any of the Conservative MPs regarding the anti-scab legislation, and do you have any confidence that they will support it?
I haven't talked to anyone on that particular thing, and for me, it doesn't matter in the sense that if they don't want to come to the table, we got the votes to get it done. But hopefully, everyone realizes that having scabs in the workplace is unhealthy and is actually counterproductive to not only the safety at the workplace, but also the way that we actually go about training employees for the future, and also our production capacity and competition with the rest of the world. When you talk to employers right now, they're looking for good skilled labor, and that comes from union shops. So hopefully they understand all that, and hopefully Conservatives with unions in their networks know that as well too. So I'd like to see this passed unanimously, but I just want to get it done right away because we've had enough problems with scab labor in this country, and we're just setting it right now for federal, and we're hoping that the provincial people will come on board, so perhaps that'll lead towards some provinces making some good decisions as well. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Salut tout le monde, je suis ici pour parler un peu de nos attentes pour la déclaration économique qui vient demain. Évidemment, il y a une crise de logement ici au Canada et d'abordabilité. Alors, nous voulons voir des mesures qui feront en sorte que le gouvernement contribue à la construction de nouveaux locations ou unités de location dans le marché de logement, y inclut des appartements qui ne sont pas sur le marché, mais qui ont des locations qui sont sous le taux du marché. I'm here just to talk really briefly about our expectations for the fall economic statement. Tomorrow, obviously, we're living a housing crisis here in Canada. It's not something that happened overnight. It's not going to get solved overnight, but we do need to make steady progress. And in particular, we need to make sure that the government is moving on funding non-market housing as well as market housing. So in Bill C-56, we saw a measure to take the GST off purpose-built rental, including for market housing, but we know that a number of funds, like the co-investment fund, for instance, that the government announced a long time ago, are depleted or all committed right now, and we need to see a replenishment of those funds so that the nonprofit organizations across the country that are doing great work delivering affordable or social housing for Canadians can get back to work and do that work. And so we put a real emphasis in our discussions with the government around the fall economic statement on ensuring that there's new investment in housing.
Croyez-vous que c'est une bonne idée de s'attaquer aux locations à court terme de type Airbnb?
Je pense que c'est un espace où il y a de la place pour des politiques. On voit des municipalités qui prennent action ici. Alors, d'avoir une façon que le gouvernement fédéral pourrait complémenter les initiatives locaux à cet égard dans les marchés où c'est un problème, parce que ce n'est pas un problème dans tous les marchés au Canada, et quelque chose auquel nous sommes ouverts. On va attendre pour voir les détails pour vous donner une réponse, oui ou non, si on appuie les mesures spécifiques que le gouvernement fédéral parle d'emporter dans la déclaration.
A priori, vous aimez ça.
Je pense qu'il y a une place pour une réglementation des locations à court terme, mais ça devrait être quelque chose que les gouvernements municipaux offrent le leadership là-dessus. Je ne pense pas qu'une politique provenant d'Ottawa est nécessairement la bonne chose à faire. Alors, on verra qu'est-ce qui est les détails du propos fédéral.
Mais concrètement, dans vos négociations avec le gouvernement, quelle a été votre principale demande? Est-ce qu'il y en a une qui c'est vraiment un ça passe ou ça casse? Là?
Et sur les négociations pour la déclaration et pour C-56, nous avons été vraiment clairs que nous voulons prioriser deux choses. La construction de nouveaux logements, marchés et non marchés, et des mesures pour s'adresser aux problèmes d'abordabilité et le rôle que les grandes corporations jouent quand ils ont beaucoup de pouvoir dans un marché, comme le marché des épiceries, par exemple. Alors, nous voulons voir des mesures qui donnent plus de pouvoir aux bureaux de compétition pour être capables de s'adresser à ces problèmes-là.
Airbnb en anglais, s'il vous plaît.
Airbnb?
Yeah.
We're certainly open to the idea that that there's some need for action in the short-term rental space. We know that there are certainly a lot of Canadians that are just using it in order to supplement their income when they're not at home. That's not something that we think is problematic, but there are also people who have gone into business buying up units for the sole purpose of putting them on the short-term rental market. It's not the same in all the different real estate markets across the country. So there are some municipalities that have been taking action, and where they feel that that is a big problem in their local real estate market, we think it makes sense to have the federal government get on board with those municipalities who are trying to address that problem to expand their toolkit. We'll wait and see what the details are when the government announces them tomorrow to give you a straight yes or no on whether we support their particular proposal. But there's certainly room within that policy space to take action in a way that I think helps address those real estate markets across the country where short-term rentals are really driving up prices for Canadians who need a home.
We're expecting $15 billion in loans for housing. Is that something that the NDP would be supportive of, or do you think it should be done a different way?
That's certainly one way to do it. We've also, reading in the CBC story that you may well be familiar with, that they're also talking about a $1 billion replenishment of their co-investment fund. That's important for non-market housing. The low-interest financing is important for market housing, which Canada also needs. We want to see that low-interest financing extended to, for instance, post-secondary institutions that want to build more housing for students on their campus. We want to see it extended to various types of senior housing projects that haven't necessarily been able to access that low-income financing or low-interest financing in the past. So there is a role for low-interest financing. We've heard that from not just from developers in the housing space, but also a lot of nonprofit developers as well, who are saying, look, our budgets are really tight because of rising interest rates. If we could get a break on the interest rate, we could allow more projects to go forward. So yes, that's something we're supportive of as part of a suite of initiatives, but we also do want to see more core investment in social housing by the federal government.
Est-ce qu'on comprend que c'est pas tant les mesures à qui elles vont s'adresser que vous allez regarder demain dans la mise à jour économique?
Pardon?
Est-ce qu'on comprend que ce n'est pas autant les mesures comme telles que à qui vont s'adresser ces mesures-là que vous allez regarder demain quand vous allez lire l'énoncé économique?
Que je comprends bien
will you look at the measure, or will you specifically look at who will be targeted by the measure tomorrow?
Bien, je pense que n'importe où que vous êtes comme Canadien sur le spectre de logement, il y a un besoin pour soit des meilleures politiques provenant d'Ottawa ou des dépenses pour construire le type de logement dont vous avez besoin. Alors oui, on va regarder à quel type de personnes sont ciblées par les mesures, parce qu'on veut voir que nous avons des mesures pour tous les Canadiens et Canadiennes, n'importe où ils se trouvent sur ce spectrum-là. Juste une dernière question, parce qu'après ça, je dois me présenter en chambre pour la période des questions. Merci. Bon? OK, thank you very much.
CTV News has learned that you guys spent about $14.6 million in accommodation and travel in the first 6 months of this year, a 10% increase from last year. What accounts for that?
I don't know. I have good people in my office that look after the budget. I just show up for Ottawa when I'm supposed to. But if I had the option, when we had the virtual option, I'd much rather be home with my family, much rather be home with my constituency. It would be better for the planet if we had, if we had weeks where we could do virtually all of us here. We would cut down on that, but we'd also cut down on the emissions that we're creating. So I think that if there's an opportunity from this story to look at how much time we spend in Ottawa in hotels as opposed to be back in our home in our own beds, I'd appreciate that conversation.
Do you think it's also just plane airfare is just more expensive, just the cost of everything is more expensive, and now you guys are going to Ottawa more frequently, right, this year?
I'd say, when we're in this job, you're told that you're going to expect 30 weeks of your 52 weeks in Ottawa or traveling for work. I think that's just part of it. But I'd much rather see a more of a dependence on virtual. That's not only better for the budget, but it's better for the planet.
CTV News learned that there's been a 10% increase in travel expenses and accommodations brought by MPs. Can you just explain how to account for that?
Well, there's been a large increase in costs generally in Canada, so I'm sure that's part of it. But when it comes to MP travel costs, it's a big country, and lots of MPs like me are from a long ways away, and our travel bills are high, and that's a necessary part of equalizing democracy.
Do you think there's a decrease in hybrid, too? Are you more of you guys traveling back to Ottawa, and that's sort of a reflection of the cost?
I believe in the need to be here representing my constituents as much as possible. I don't believe that hybrid actually is an effective way of representation.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, I think I'm not certain what's accounting for the increase, but what I'm certain of is that MPs in the country, particularly our northern representatives, like we think about Nunavut, a huge territory, very difficult to travel to. If me and you tried traveling there, it would cost us thousands. It costs MPs thousands of dollars too, particularly from northern ridings. If it's from Toronto, it's going to be less. And so we're seeing huge costs starting to escalate when it comes to travel, but that's often because we're also seeing an increase in inflation. But the reality is it's not getting cheaper to travel either, particularly for northern MPs. And so that's, I think, a really important piece for us to remember when speaking specifically about the size and geography of our country, and more importantly for the northern MPs, like the ones in Nunavut and like my colleague Laurie Idlout. Thank you.